On April 2nd, 2025, something happened that will destroy the purchasing power of every dollar you've saved. The average American didn't notice it. Most still don't understand what it means. But on that single day, the United States government imposed the highest import taxes since the Great Depression. The average effective tariff rate hit 22.5%, the highest since 1909. That's not a typo. We're talking about tax levels not seen in 116 years. And if you think this is just about making foreign countries pay more, you're about to get a very expensive education in how tariffs actually work. Because here's what nobody is telling you. The average household will lose $3,800 per year in purchasing power. For families at the bottom of the income distribution, that number is $1,700 annually. That's money that simply vanishes from your ability to buy food, clothing, electronics, and everything else you need to live. And it gets worse, much worse, because the $3,800 is just the beginning. That's the direct hit. The secondary effects, the cascading price increases, the wage stagnation, the job losses, those are coming in 2026. And when they arrive, they're going to make 2025 look like the good old days. Let me show you exactly what happened on April 2nd, why it's far more devastating than anyone is admitting, and what it means for every dollar you've saved, every investment you own, and every plan you've made for your financial future. The day everything changed, before April the 2nd, 2025, the United States had an average effective tariff rate of 2.4%. That's what Americans had been paying on imports for decades. Low, stable, predictable. The global supply chain hummed along. Goods flowed freely. Prices stayed relatively stable. Then, in a single executive order, everything changed. President Trump signed proclamations imposing tariffs on virtually every trading partner on Earth. A baseline 10% tariff on all countries. 25% on automobiles and auto parts, 25% on steel and aluminum, and then country-specific rates that went even higher. China faced rates up to 54%. The European Union got hit with rates ranging from 20% to 30%. Japan saw rates of 24%. Canada and Mexico, our largest trading partners under USMCA, were supposed to be exempt, but even they got hit with selective tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos. Now, by the time the dust settled, the average effective tariff rate had jumped from 2.4% to 22.5%. That's a 940% increase in a single day. To put this in perspective, the last time American tariff rates were this high was 1909. That was before World War I, before the income tax existed, before the Federal Reserve was even created. We're talking about reversing 116 years of trade liberalization in 24 hours. The new tariffs could raise just under $400 billion in revenue, or about 1.3% of U.S. GDP, which would be the largest tax increase since the Revenue Act of 1968, the largest tax increase in 57 years. And it's a tax that falls hardest on the people who can least afford it. Now, here's what the politicians told you would happen. They said foreign countries would pay the tariffs. They said this was about making China and Europe and Mexico pay their fair share. They said American workers would benefit. American manufacturers would thrive. Jobs would come flooding back. That's not what's happening. Not even close. The $3,800 lie. Let me explain how tariffs actually work, because this is where the government is lying to you. When a Chinese company ships a container of electronics to the United States, and that container arrives at the port of Los Angeles, U.S. Customs and Border Protection assesses a tariff. Now, who pays that $25,000? The U.S. importer pays it, not the Chinese company. The American business that ordered the goods pays the tariff to the U.S. government. The Chinese company already got paid. They shipped the goods. They're done. The American importer is now out an extra $25,000 that they didn't plan on spending. So what does the American importer do? They have three choices. They can absorb the cost and take a 25% hit to their profit margin, which would bankrupt most businesses. They can find a different supplier in a country with lower tariffs, which takes months or years and often isn't possible. Or they can raise prices and pass the cost on to American consumers. Guess which option they choose? They raise prices every single time. Empirical research has found that the pass-through rate is generally high, often near 100%, meaning that the burden of tariffs typically falls on domestic consumers and firms rather than foreign exporters. So when politicians say China is paying the tariffs, they're lying. You're paying the tariffs. Every American consumer is paying them through higher prices on everything they buy. And the numbers are staggering. The price level from all 2025 tariffs rises by 2.3% in the short run. That might not sound like much, but remember, this is on top of the inflation we've already experienced. And 2.3% across your entire cost of living adds up fast. For the average household, that translates to a consumer loss of $3,800 in 2024 dollars. Let me put that in perspective. The median American household earns about $75,000 per year. A $3,800 loss is 5% of their income. Gone. Just vanished into higher prices. For low-income families earning $30,000 per year, a $1,600 loss is 5.7% of their income. These are families already living paycheck to paycheck. They don't have $1,600 to spare. They're going to have to cut something. Food, medicine, heat, rent. This is a regressive tax. It hits the poor harder than the rich, and it's happening right now in real time while politicians tell you that foreign countries are footing the bill. What you're actually paying for, let me break down exactly where that $3,800 is coming from, because understanding the mechanics will help you see what's coming next. Tariffs disproportionately affect clothing and textiles, with apparel prices rising 17% under all tariffs. If your family spends $2,000 per year on clothing, you're now spending $2,340. That's $340 more. Metal imports are a central target of recent tariffs. Depending on the type of metal, short-run prices impacts range from 9% to 40%. This doesn't just affect raw metal. It affects everything made with metal. Your car, your appliances, your electronics, your tools, your furniture. Affected consumer products include electrical equipment and consumer electronics, with a 16-18% short-run price effect. Your laptop, your phone, your TV, your washing machine, all 16-18% more expensive. Food prices rise 1.9% in the short run and stay 1.6% higher in the long run. The average American household spends about $8,000 per year on food. A 1.9% increase is $150 per year, and that's permanent. Automobiles? Section 232 tariffs on autos and certain auto parts at 25% took effect April 3 for autos and before May 3 for auto parts. And here's the insidious part. Even if you buy American-made products, prices are going up because American manufacturers use imported components, steel from Canada, electronics from Japan, textiles from Vietnam. When those components get more expensive, the final American-made product gets more expensive too. You can't escape this. There's no way to avoid paying the tariff tax. It's baked into the price of literally everything. The 2026 cascade. Now, here's where it gets truly terrifying. The $3,800 per year that you're losing right now, that's just the first order effect. That's the direct price increase from the tariffs themselves. The second order effects are coming in 2026, and they're going to be devastating. First, wages are stagnating. When companies pay more for imported goods and components, they have less money to pay workers. The short-run burden on the first decile is more than 3 times that of the top decile in terms of percentage of income lost. Lower-income workers are getting crushed because they spend a higher percentage of their income on goods, which are subject to tariffs, versus services, which aren't. But it's about to get worse, because businesses are cutting back. Manufacturing employment has dropped by more than 40,000 jobs since April, even though the tariffs were supposed to help manufacturing. Why? Because manufacturers rely on imported components. When those components get 25% more expensive, manufacturers either raise prices, which kills demand, or they cut costs, which means layoffs. Second, business investment is collapsing. In the downside scenario, high tariff rates and prolonged uncertainty may lead to a 6% contraction in business investment this year. When businesses don't invest, they don't expand, they don't hire, they don't innovate. Economic growth slows. U.S. real GDP growth is 0.9 percentage points lower from all 2025 tariffs. In the long run, the U.S. economy is persistently 0.6% smaller. That's $180 billion per year in lost economic output, forever. That's $180 billion that could have been wages, profits, tax revenue, innovation, gone. Third, inflation is accelerating. Over the June-August 2025 period, tariffs explain roughly 0.5 percentage points of headline PCE annualized inflation. That's on top of other inflationary pressures. And it's getting worse. Year-over-year CPI inflation is expected to rise to 3.5% by Q4 2025, before drifting down to 2.8% by the fourth quarter of 2026. Notice that it does not go back to 2%. It stays elevated because the tariffs are permanent. And here's the kicker. The Federal Reserve can't help you. Normally, when the economy slows, the Fed cuts interest rates to stimulate growth. But when the economy is slowing because of inflation, not despite it, the Fed is stuck. If they cut rates, they make inflation worse. If they keep rates high, they make the slowdown worse. Fed officials have suggested tariffs have affected policy, with Chair Powell stating that the FOMC essentially went on hold when they saw the size of the tariffs, and inflation forecasts went up materially as a consequence. The Fed is paralyzed, they're flying blind, and you're paying the price. The recession. Nobody's preparing for. Let's talk about what's coming in 2026. Because all of this, the price increases, the wage stagnation, the business investment collapse, it's building towards something much bigger, a recession. Not maybe, not possibly, it's coming. The only question is how bad it gets. Here's why it's inevitable. Consumer spending is 68% of the U.S. economy. When consumers lose $3,800 per year in purchasing power, they cut back, they buy less, they delay purchases, they save more out of fear. Consumer spending growth is expected to slow to just 1% in 2026. That's down from over 2% in 2025. When consumer spending growth falls that much, GDP growth follows. Businesses are already seeing this. More than 30% of surveyed firms identify trade and tariffs as their most pressing business concern, up sharply from just 8.3% in the previous quarter. Business leaders know what's coming, they're preparing for it, and that means cutting costs, which means layoffs. Unemployment is expected to rise to an annual rate of 5.3% by 2026 from 4% in 2024 under the downside scenario. That's 1.3 percentage points higher. In an economy of 168 million workers, that's 2.2 million additional people unemployed, 2.2 million people who will lose their paychecks, who will stop spending, who will default on loans, who will lose their homes. And remember, this is the downside scenario. But given what we've seen so far, given the size of the tariffs, given the lack of trade deals that would reduce them, the downside scenario is looking more and more like the baseline. In the long run, the U.S. economy is persistently 0.4% to 0.6% smaller from the tariffs alone. That's before accounting for the recession. That's before accounting for the additional damage from unemployment, business failures, and financial distress. We're looking at a self-inflicted economic wound that will take years to heal. The legal time bomb. Now, here's where it gets even more complicated, and potentially much worse. The U.S. Trade Court has ruled the majority of these new tariffs, those enacted under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, illegal. Read that again. The court ruled the tariffs illegal. Not some of them, the majority of them. The case is now before the Supreme Court, and if the Supreme Court upholds the lower court ruling, the entire tariff structure collapses. Or rather, it should collapse. But here's the problem. If the Supreme Court upholds the lower court decisions, projected net new revenue from tariff policies implemented this year will fall by about $2.2 trillion to around $900 billion for the FY 2025 to 2035 period. The federal government has already budgeted for that $2.2 trillion in tariff revenue. It's already spent against it. If the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, the government loses $2.2 trillion in expected revenue. That's $2.2 trillion that has to come from somewhere else. Higher taxes, spending cuts, or more borrowing, which means more debt, which means more interest payments, which means a bigger fiscal hole. But here's the truly insane part. Even if the Supreme Court rules the tariffs illegal, they might not go away. The Trump administration has other options to impose import taxes, using powers that were explicitly granted by Congress. They can reimpose the same tariffs under different legal authority. So you might get hit twice, once with the current tariffs, then, if they're struck down and reimposed, with the economic chaos of uncertainty. Businesses won't know what tariff rates apply. Supply chains will freeze, importers will stop ordering, prices will spike as inventories run out. The legal uncertainty alone could trigger a crisis. What your $3,800 actually buys. Let's get practical. I've told you that you're losing $3,800 per year. Let me show you what that actually means in terms of specific goods you buy every day. Your grocery bill. Food prices rise 1.9% in the short run and stay 1.6% higher in the long run. If you spend $800 per month on groceries, that's $9,600 per year. A 1.9% increase is $182 per year. That's $182 you used to spend on food that now just disappears. Your clothing. Consumers face particularly high increases in leather and clothing in the short run. Prices increased 24% for leather products like shoes and handbags and general apparel. A $100 pair of shoes is now $124. A $50 shirt is now $62. For a family of four that spends $2,000 per year on clothing, you're now spending $2,280. That's $480 gone. Your car. If you're in the market for a new vehicle, the hit is enormous. 25% tariffs on autos and certain auto parts. The average new car costs $48,000. If 30% of that car's value comes from tariffed components, that's $1,400 to $400 in parts. A 25% tariff adds $3,600 to the price. Your $48,000 car is now $50,600. Your home improvements, lumber. Section 232 tariffs on softwood timber and lumber. Appliances, they contain steel, electronics, and imported components. All tariffed. A kitchen remodel that would have cost $20,000 now costs $23,000 to $24,000. Your phone, laptop, TV, electrical equipment, and consumer electronics face a 16-18% short-run price effect. This is death by 1,000 cuts. No single item is going to bankrupt you. But when every single thing you buy costs 2% to 25% more, and your wages aren't going up, you're getting poorer. Month by month, purchase by purchase. The wealth transfer. You didn't agree to. Here's what's really happening. This isn't just about prices. This is a massive wealth transfer from American consumers to the federal government and to a select group of protected industries. The federal government raised $195 billion in customs duties in fiscal year 2025, more than 250% of what it collected in FY 2024. That $195 billion extracted from consumers through higher prices and given to the government. Now, you might say, well, the government needs revenue. Isn't that better than income taxes? And that's a fair question. President Trump has suggested Americans won't have to pay personal income taxes in the not too distant future because of rising U.S. tariffs. But here's the problem. It is mechanically impossible to fully replace income tax revenues with tariffs. The math doesn't work. The federal government collected $2.2 trillion in individual income taxes in 2024. There's a hard cap on the amount of money you can raise with tariffs. Economists say you can maybe raise $700 billion a year, which would be a very high effective tax rate, and across the board 20% to 30% tariff rate. But if it's pushed above that, nobody would buy imports. When tariffs get too high, people stop buying imports. Companies source domestically or go out of business. Tariff revenue actually falls because there's nothing left to tax. So the tariffs will never replace income taxes. They're just an additional tax on top of income taxes. You're paying both, and the tariff tax is regressive, meaning poor people pay more as a percentage of income than rich people. A family earning $30,000 per year spends almost all of it on goods. A 2% price increase from tariffs costs them $600 or 2% of their income. A family earning $300,000 per year might spend $100,000 on goods and save or invest the rest. A 2% price increase costs them $2,000, but that's only 0.67% of their income. The poor family pays 3 times as much as a share of income. That's regressive, that's unfair, and that's what's happening right now. The 2026 choice. So what happens next? Where does this go? There are 3 possible paths for 2026, and none of them are good. Path 1, tariffs. Stay economy contracts. In this scenario, the tariffs remain in place. The Supreme Court either upholds them or the administration reimposes them under different legal authority. The U.S. economy remains persistently 0.6% smaller in the long run. Consumer spending grows at only 1% in 2026. Unemployment rises to 5.3%. We enter a recession in Q2 or Q3 2026. The federal government collects its $2.5 trillion in tariff revenue over the next decade, but loses even more in income tax and payroll tax revenue because the economy is smaller and people are making less money. This is stagflation, slow growth plus elevated inflation. It's the worst economic environment possible, and it could last for years. Path 2, tariffs. Reversed, chaos ensues. In this scenario, the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs and they're actually removed. Prices should fall, right? Consumer spending should recover? Not so fast. The damage has already been done. Businesses that borrowed money to rebuild supply chains are stuck with debt. Companies that went bankrupt don't come back. Workers who were laid off don't instantly get rehired. Plus, the federal government loses $2.2 trillion in expected revenue. That means either massive spending cuts or massive tax increases. Either one crashes the economy and the uncertainty. If tariffs can be imposed and removed overnight, businesses can't plan. They can't invest. They freeze. The economy freezes with them. Path 3. Tariff war escalates. This is the darkest scenario. Other countries retaliate. China imposes 60% tariffs on American goods. Europe does the same. A full-blown trade war erupts. American exports collapse. Boeing can't sell planes to China. Apple can't sell iPhones to Europe. Agricultural exports to Asia vanish. Farmers go bankrupt. Factory workers lose jobs. In scenarios with retaliation, China's economy could be 0.3% smaller, but the US takes a bigger hit. We lose more than they do because we're the ones who started the war. Global GDP contracts. A worldwide recession begins. And unlike 2008, governments have no ammunition left. Interest rates are already high. Debt levels are already massive. There's no stimulus coming. This is a depression, not a recession. A depression. And it starts with the tariffs that were imposed on April 2nd, 2025. The moves that save you. I know this is dark. I know it's terrifying. But here's the important part. If you understand what's coming, you can protect yourself. First, reduce your exposure to imported goods. If you know prices are going to keep rising, buy what you need now. If your car is getting old, replace it before prices go up further. If you need appliances, furniture, electronics, buy them now while inventories from pre-tariff orders are still available. Second, shift your spending toward services. Services aren't subject to tariffs. Haircuts, massages, streaming subscriptions, these don't get more expensive because of tariffs. Redirect your discretionary spending toward services and away from goods where possible. Third, invest in businesses that benefit from tariffs. If there are 25% tariffs on imported steel, American steel companies should benefit. If there are tariffs on imported furniture, American furniture manufacturers should see higher demand. Position your investments accordingly. But be careful. Many American manufacturers rely on imported components. They're going to get hurt, not helped. Do your research. Fourth, hold hard assets, real estate, commodities. Things with intrinsic value that can't be inflated away. When the dollar weakens, when prices rise, hard assets maintain their value. Fifth, increase your income. This is obvious, but critical. If your expenses are going up $3,800 per year, you need to earn $3,800 more just to stay even. Negotiate raises, change jobs, start side hustles. Do whatever it takes to increase your income. Sixth, build your emergency fund. If a recession hits in 2026, if unemployment spikes to 5.3%, you need to be prepared. 6 months of expenses, minimum, 12 months is better. Seventh, and most important, understand that this is just the beginning. The $3,800 per year you're losing in 2025 is going to be $4,000 or $5,000 in 2026 as the secondary effects cascade. The job losses, the business failures, the wage stagnation, all of it is going to compound. Position yourself now, not next year, not when the recession is obvious. Now, while you still have options. The $3,800 warning. On April 2nd, 2025, the United States government imposed a tax increase on every American consumer. They didn't call it a tax increase, they called it trade policy. But the effect is the same. The average household is losing $3,800 per year. Poor families are losing $1,700 per year, and it's permanent. The politicians who imposed these tariffs told you that foreign countries would pay. They lied. You're paying through higher prices on everything you buy. They told you that American manufacturing would benefit. Manufacturing employment has dropped by more than 40,000 jobs since April. They lied again. They told you that the economy would get stronger. The U.S. economy is persistently 0.6% smaller in the long run. Another lie. And the worst part? This is just the beginning. The $3,800 you've lost in 2025 is going to turn into much bigger losses in 2026 when the recession hits, when unemployment spikes, when businesses fail, when the financial system starts showing cracks. The average American has no idea what's coming. They see prices going up a little. They notice their grocery bill is higher. They're annoyed that the new car costs more. But they don't understand that this is the early stage of something much bigger. The average effective tariff rate is 22.5%, the highest since 1909. We have reversed 116 years of trade liberalization. We have imposed a regressive tax that hits the poor hardest. We have triggered a chain reaction that will lead to recession, unemployment, and financial distress. And the people who did this, the politicians and policymakers who imposed these tariffs, they're already protected, but you should be. Because this is your money, your job, your future. The tariff tsunami hit on April 2nd, 2025. Most people didn't feel it. They felt a little wave, a small price increase here and there. But the big wave, the one that destroys everything in its path, that's coming in 2026. And the only question is whether you're going to be ready when it arrives, or whether you're going to be one of the millions of Americans who wakes up one day and realizes their savings are gone, their purchasing power is destroyed, and the economy they thought would always be there has collapsed. The $3,800 is just the warning. The real damage is still ahead. Use the time you have left wisely.